Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Matt McKinney. I'm the program manager for Penn State Startup Week, powered by PNC. And on behalf of Invent Penn State, thank you for coming. I'm really looking forward to introducing our next speaker, Ross Perkins. So I'm going to say a few words about him before we let him get started. So Ross will be with us all week this year at the conference. He's our entrepreneur in residence. So he'll be acting as a business pitch competition judge, meeting with students one-on-one, and just generally being involved throughout the week with a bunch of the sessions and activities that we have going on. I first met Ross in 2015. I worked across the street from him in Washington, D.C., right when they were launching Mason Dixie Biscuit Company at the time, selling one biscuit at a time at a food market across from Gallaudet University. And I asked Ross and his co-owner if they would come to my course, come to my class, and interact with my students. And for the past 7 years, Ross and Asha have been very generous with their time and resources, acting as business pitch competitions, mentors to students, and then oftentimes giving me a call at the end of the semester and asking who were the best and brightest kids in my class, and then they would reach out to them and offer them jobs and internships. So I'm really excited to have Ross here at Penn State. And I think I missed a few things in your introduction there.
I'll fill in for you. It's totally fine.
All right. So Ross will fill in a little bit there, but Ross is going to share his journey today with a company that has products now in 8,000 retailers, specialty grocery stores, and hotels nationwide. The title of Ross's talk is Making a Product is Hard, a Story in Frozen Food. So please help me welcome Ross Perkins.
So I want to get started to give you an idea on how the brand actually got started before we dive into all the steps that it took to bring a product to market, from conception all the way to national distribution. So my former business partner, Asha, she is currently the CEO of Mason Dixie Foods. We are a woman-owned business. I think she's doing a session later this week, actually, on women in entrepreneurship. She created the concept actually as a restaurant. We actually started off as a restaurant group in Washington, D.C. The idea was, this is 2014 when this is getting going. If you're not aware of what's happening in the restaurant space at this time, a lot of fast casual concepts are being developed. Chipotle is reaching its growth phase. Cava and Sweetgreen are growing tremendously. So she wanted to bring Southern fast casual food to the marketplace. She created a business plan to create this restaurant group, and the idea was that there would be a CPG line, that means consumer packaged goods. There would be a small CPG line as a nice add-on. This would be similar to something like you would see at Jenny's Ice Cream. Jenny's is based in Columbus, Ohio. The bulk of their revenue comes from their brick and mortar locations, but they do sell their pints in a lot of grocery stores across the country. But their core business is their brick and mortar location. So she comes up with this idea to create a restaurant brand for Washington, D.C., and to have a CPG business kind of on the side. I'm not in the store yet. I come on board in 2015. So the opportunity, though, for the CPG line came actually from one of our customers. She launches at a food hall in Washington, D.C. This is at the very beginning of when food halls are getting their traction. They were a novelty back in 2014, 2015. Today, you can see a handful in most major cities. So, she launches the brand right out the gate. There's a lot of traction and a lot of consumer demand. And we have one customer that comes up to us and says, we really, really like these biscuits. We wish we could have them on our shelves. And she goes, well, what shelves are you talking about? And this customer says Whole Foods. So this customer happened to be the marketing manager of Whole Foods Mid-Atlantic. Whole Foods is, just to give you some context, Whole Foods is broken into about a dozen different regions, and every region has some autonomy with their purchasing capabilities. The idea is that when you go to Whole Foods, it kind of reflects the community in which it's servicing. So you go to Whole Foods in your local neighborhood, and there'd be some products that would be unique to that location. So A lot of that's changed actually since the Amazon acquisition of Whole Foods, but by and large, there is still some autonomy with the regional purchasing within Whole Foods. So this customer, this marketing manager of Whole Foods Mid-Atlantic, she approaches Asha and says, like, I really wish there was biscuits like this that we could have on our shelf. So my business partner, thinks about how she can take something that's ready for the restaurant and package it and make it into something that would be ready to go for grocery stores. That's something that can handle the whole distribution, the end-to-end distribution channel. So she's making a product that is made with real ingredients. There's no preservatives. There's no additives. The only way you can preserve something that's preservative-free effectively is to freeze it. She tries freezing the dough, bakes it off. A day later, it's successful. So she thinks, okay, let's go ahead and launch this product. That's where I come in. So the last 7.5 years of my professional life has been focused on our core, bringing our products to market. So this is our first product that we launched. It's our frozen buttermilk biscuits. And these are found in several thousand retailers across the country. So she launches the product in partnership with me. We launched in Q4 of 2015 in one store. Fast forward, 7 years, we got nationwide distribution, and we have additional product lines that we've launched as well, including we've had scones, we've had sweet rolls, we have ready-to-eat sandwiches as well, and we have a litany of other product lines that we've launched in our time. To give you some context too, we have no more brick and mortar locations. We did open up a drive-through in Northeast. We had another location in downtown DC. COVID kind of like put the kibosh on our brick and mortars because, to be completely frank, our concept was geared towards breakfast. A lot of commuters and office catering. People are not going to be ordering breakfast online. It's just not something that translated really well in the COVID. But the silver lining was it allowed us to focus completely on the CPG opportunity for Mason Dixie Foods. All right, so I'm going to walk through step by step how the execution of a product from conception through the manufacturing phase, distribution, to get into consumers' hands. So the first step I wanted to talk about is the ideation stage. I've participated in numerous entrepreneurial events before and pitch competitions. And one way I kind of know that someone is on the right track is when they provide a solution to a problem. And my first thought is like, why isn't this a thing already? So when our customer from Whole Foods came to us to present us with this idea of bringing our biscuits to Whole Foods, what she was talking about was this white space opportunity. In the grocery space, a white space opportunity is this. Like, you have your cart or your basket, you're walking down the aisle, you have, you want some scones, you want some frozen bread, you want some sandwiches, but as you go down the aisle where this consumer preference would generally be, let's say you want biscuits, there's no biscuits to be had. So there's a white space opportunity when there's a missing preference basically for consumer preferences. There's not a vendor providing the product to fulfill those consumer expectations. So the marketing manager of Whole Foods Mid-Atlantic came to us with a white space opportunity. My business partner, she figured out a solution to the problem. Let's bring these biscuits to market. Let's go after a space that no one else is playing in right now. So once you come up with the solution, the next thing you really want to do, you want to be considerate about, is determining the size of the prize. How lucrative is this opportunity? It can be, though, a catch-22, because if you're bringing a new product to market, how you determine the market size for something that actually doesn't exist before? Well, this is something that a lot of entrepreneurs have encountered. And what we do is we find similar products, similar spaces, and we pull data, we buy data. This is true for a lot of industries. You can usually go to data centers and buy data to understand what your competitive landscape is. You can buy data to figure out what the market size is. You can figure out what the growth opportunities are. And so we purchased data for the frozen biscuit space writ large. And through a litany of assumptions, we knew that, okay, we would be, we'd be operating in a smaller subset of stores. We'd be more expensive than our competition, so only so many consumers would be interested in this product. Through our assumptions, we kind of whittled down the whole pie for the industry into a number that we found to be relatively defensible. And once we had that defensible number, we realized like it's a lucrative opportunity. It's lucrative enough for us to go after. We did our research on the competitive landscape within the marketplace. Just like I said, the customer that gave us the opportunity said we'd be the only one of its kind in the natural space. That wasn't going to be true if we were going to Kroger and Publix. There's a lot of frozen biscuit makers out there. They tend to also make kind of like very similar, all their products tend to be similar, and they compete on price and they compete on pack out. And then the other thing when you're doing the ideation stage, and this is true of any industry that you're going to be in, you want to avoid the herd mentality, especially as you get deeper and deeper into your space. You're going to be talking to the same people, you're going to go to the same conferences, you're going to be reading the same materials, and you're going to be operating in an echo chamber of sorts on what perhaps consumer preferences are, and it's important for you to take a step back and to talk to others in other spaces so you can make the determination if you're going down the right path. This is when you have to engage with others outside of your industry to really get a full picture as to what's going on. So you come up with your idea, you figure out what the solution to a potential problem. How are you going to pay for it? So there's probably nothing that provides more heartache to an entrepreneur than figuring out how to finance a business. On the very early stages, when you are just getting started, all you're able to do is put your blood, sweat, and tears into growing the business. That's called sweat equity. For those who have the means, those that have the social network, they can tap into friends and family to get initial funds to start launching their business. When it comes to acquiring financing, I don't think I can overemphasize how important soft skills matter. We'll be talking through the course of this presentation, a lot of the problems that you're going to encounter, you can tackle with analytical hard skills. Acquiring financing from investors requires you deploying those soft skills. You need to, this is where you have to network, talk to anyone and everyone who want be remotely engaged with your idea. This was, I'll be honest, this was not something that I had to strengthen. My former business partner, Asha, this is something that she absolutely excelled in. She could market Mason Dixie Foods. She could talk the idea up to anyone. She could find out who the decision makers were to get them as excited in the brand as we were excited about our brand. She was able, through a litany of conversations, to get what we call a seed round, our first round of fundraising several years ago to really take the CPG line to the next level. There was, she went through more than 100 conversations. When you acquire financing, you have to be cognizant that all you need is one yes. You just need one yes to get you started. And it might not come from the person that you talk to today, but that person might talk to somebody else at an event like this, who talks to someone else at an event like this, who remembers your idea, who circles back around a few months later. It might be a prime opportunity for them to provide capital on your behalf. A lot has changed just within the last few months regarding access to capital. I'm sure a lot of you have taken macroeconomic courses, or at least cognizant of what's happening out there and domestically. Interest rates have gone up, so borrowing costs are going up. There's inflationary pressures from consumers, though that's starting to mitigate a little bit. You have the general reticence that investors have right now with SVB, and we got a litany of other banks that are, Credit Suisse is happening. So investors are starting to be a little more cautious about providing investments in spaces or with businesses that don't have a track record, which means it's even more impactful that you have strong numbers behind you and a strong business case behind you. And then the final thing I want to talk about when you're going through the capitalization process is that creativity matters. When you get started, it's not going to be an either-or situation. You're not going to just do friends and family. You're probably not just going to do traditional financing through a bank should you be able to access that. You're going to have to put all these different pieces together in order for you to get the capital that you need in order to get your business off the ground. So you figured out the product. You've kind of put together your idea on how to finance it. I want to do a really quick snapshot into cash needs when it comes to the CPG space. So especially in the food CPG, it's a little bit different because it's a accrual model. So what happens is you have to purchase your inputs well in advance of when you're going to realize that revenue from your customer. So this is a general timeline. It's super simplified for what we do, but this gives you a timeline of what kind of cash needs you're going to require if you go into the food CPG business. You're often going to have to buy your inputs depending on the lead time with the vendor, anywhere from several weeks to several months in advance. At the point that you start purchasing, the clock starts ticking. So you're going to owe that vendor money within the next month or so. You are converting it to finished goods after you get all the inputs. So this is a general timeline. Within a month or two, that's converted to finished goods. You deliver it to the customer, and then in this space, as soon as it's delivered to the customer, you don't get paid on that. You generally get paid in net 30 or net 45 terms. So even after the customer gets the product, you still have to wait a month to a month and a half to receive the revenue for those finished goods. So you can see based on this timeline, you start purchasing inputs. It could be 4 months plus before you actually see revenue from the finished goods that you produced. So this makes a huge determination on your cash needs, and it has a huge impact on your cash flow analysis. So you come up with the idea, you figure out the financing, you kind of have an understanding as to how the cadence on which the cash comes in. Now you have to figure out how to make it. In this space, there is generally 2 options for people to pursue, and in food CPG, they generally go with the former, co-manufacturing. Co-manufacturing means when another vendor who has the capabilities, the technical capabilities, and the production capabilities to make your product on your behalf. Usually they make your product plus your competition's product. A few categories go into self-manufacturing. Generally, beverage is a self-manufacturing space. So there's pluses and minuses to both, and you have to be very cognizant about which path you're going to choose because it's hard to pivot between the two. So the benefit to co-manufacturing is it's asset light. So you don't have a lot of equipment sitting on your balance sheet, and you can deploy that capital to build out your sales team, to build out consumer awareness about your product. So you can go into a lot of marketing. You can focus on the research and development side of your business as well and find additional product lines in which you can launch. The downside, though, is because someone else is making your product on your behalf, you don't really have visibility into the production process to find efficiencies. And generally, the co-manufacturer does not have any incentive to find efficiencies as well. You got to remember, too, that you're just going to be one of many customers to a co-manufacturer. So if they have a larger customer within their portfolio that needs the line time, that needs time in the facility, you might be kicked off, and it might be several weeks before they get to you to produce your product, which will create out of stock issues. The benefits of self-manufacturing is you get all that control. You can control the end-to-end process. You can control the procurement. You can control the waste factors. You can control your inventory. The downside is the opposite of co-manufacturing. It's capital intensive. You're going to be, when you do your raise, you're going to be spending a lot of money to get that facility off the ground. it's a long time horizon as well. So you better be sure that whatever product you're bringing to market, because you just build a facility that produces that product, that it has longevity in the marketplace. The upside, though, is you can also use the extra capacity that you have in your facility as a revenue stream and actually move into the co-manufacturing space as a manufacturer yourself. So there's two general pathways that people pursue. And like I said, we did the co-manufacturing pathway. Most food businesses do. In beverage, they generally go with self-manufacturing. So how do you get your products into the hands of the consumer? So after you make it, you figure out the product, you figure out how to finance it, you figure out how your cash is coming in, and you figure out how you're going to produce it. Well, how do you get into the hands of the consumers? I want to touch on the supply chain collapse of 2021. This is something that impacted the entire food industry. If you don't remember, around the summer of last year, you'd go to grocery stores and there'd be holes in the grocery store shelf. There would be missing areas where you couldn't get breads, or there would be juices that were out of stock, or there would be granola that would be out of stock, whatever. What happened was, and this is when the collapse happened, it forced a lot of companies to move into a different supply chain model. So what happened was, when COVID hit, all of that demand that was in restaurants, because restaurants closed, shifted to grocery, which was fantastic for companies that are already in the CPG industry. So all this demand that was at the restaurants shifted to grocery. We saw sales go through the roof. Conversely, because those restaurants were closed, all these vendors that used to supply the restaurants were now supplying CPG brands. Additionally, manufacturing firms that also supplied restaurants had excess capacity and were hungry for working with CPG companies. That was great through 2020. Come 2021, as the vaccine's rolling out and COVID's a little bit mitigated, what starts happening? Restaurants start opening back up again. When they start opening back up, it's just like a pendulum. That demand shifts over to the restaurants, and we saw vendors move out of the CPG side, start servicing restaurants again. A lot of that excess capacity that we saw on the CPG side evaporated overnight, and one by one, the pins within the supply chain started to break. Our supply chain, our food supply chain is relatively fragile. It's less so now, but it was definitely fragile in 2020 and 2021. Everything was in a just-in-time kind of cadence where inputs would move in and be converted and move right back out. So that way there wasn't, you're not sitting on a lot of inventory. You want things to, cash to come in, cash to go out. You don't want to be sitting on anything of excess. Just-in-time works when it works, and when it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And it didn't work very, very quickly. And we saw what we saw when we in the grocery store space. There's been now a hybrid model where just-in-time is not the supply chain philosophy that it is anymore. A lot of supply chains now have added redundancy and resiliency, which means instead of one partner making a product on your behalf, you might have 2 or 3 partners making a product on your behalf. Same with your suppliers. Instead of one supplier providing your inputs on your behalf, you'll probably have 2 or 3 suppliers providing inputs on your behalf. There's pluses and minuses to both models. While it's a risk mitigation strategy to have multiple suppliers supplying a product to you, the downside is because now you split up that volume across multiple players, you have less leverage for negotiation because they get a smaller slice of the pie, if you will. So what does this look like kind of end to end? How do you make this determination as to how much you're going to produce and then in what cadence you're going to produce? So this is a kind of a 9-step model of what nearly every CPG business goes through. And this is highly simplified, but I kind of want to touch on each kind of component so you can kind of understand how it works end to end. So we start with our external data sources. We pull in all the data from the industry. We make our annual forecast, so we make the determination. This year, we're going to sell X number of units across X number of retailers. And then we break that up into what's called a demand plan. So you take your annual forecast, and If you have a product with a long shelf life, you might break up that demand plan into quarters. If you have a product with a short shelf life, you might break it down into weeks. So, if we have our annual forecast, we will break our demand plan down into, let's just say, into a monthly cadence. So month 1, we want 100,000 units. Month 2, 200,000 units. Month 3, another 100,000 units. Well, you take your demand plan, and then you create your supply plan from that. Using your vendor makeup, you figure out, okay, for month 1, if I need 100,000 units, that might mean I need 100,000 of input A, 200,000 of input B, 500,000 of input C. You use that, your supply plan, and then based on the breakdown for that and the lead time for each of those inputs, you figure out your cash flow needs. So if you need to purchase 1,000 units of input A in month 1, what's going to be your cash needs? Once you get the thumbs up from your CFO or your controller, from early stage companies, that's usually you usually don't have a CFO or a controller. It's usually one of the co-founders. You go ahead and procure your inputs, move into production, move into fulfillment, and at that point, the customer has the product and the revenue is realized. So after you service the customers, you're going to have to also provide feedback to your investors. You're going to have to report out on your performance. So what are investors looking at? What investors are looking at are the same things they've always been looking at, just perhaps a little bit more so. The bottom line is still their top line concern. Whether you call that net profit, gross profit, EBITDA, there's 1,000 different ways to slice it. The bottom line of your financial performance is what investors care about the most. The days of spending money just to aggressively grow your top line, those days are over. We saw that in 2016, 2017, 2018 with Blue Apron and WeWork, where they were offering customer incentives that were just way too expensive just to prop up their user base and prop up their growth. So that way, should they go public or when they go public, they look like they were performing better than they actually were. Investors are not really satisfied with that anymore. What they care about is a path to profitability. An early stage company, a startup, you're really not going to be profitable out the gates. And if you are, then you've gotten the golden ticket, which is impressive. But generally, you will not be. But you have to demonstrate a path to profitability to your investors. That means you have to have some sort of mechanism to show with defensible assumptions that you will be in a position of profitability a few years down the road. One of the things that you also will need to maintain, you have to maintain the scrappy attitude. You have to maintain an idea that cash is not cheap anymore. Cash, it's an expensive proposition to get cash. It's a time suck. You have to allocate a lot of resources in order to do a financing round. You have to maintain a scrappy attitude to really grow your business. And you got to think about the cost of customer acquisition as well. If it costs you a certain amount of money to attain a customer, it's probably not a customer that you want in the first place. Profitability will always come with scale. When you get to a certain volume and you understand what that volume is, you'll be able to negotiate with your vendors better. You'll be able to leverage your negotiation skills a little bit more, and you'll be able to drive the cost of your inputs down. And then the last thing I want to mention is system implementation. One of the best ways to help with bottom line enhancements is looking at software as a solution. You can often control your overhead costs. And sometimes you'll encounter a problem as an entrepreneur, and it's just a problem temporarily. And the best way to tackle it is to find a software as a solution as opposed to bringing someone on board. It's just usually a cheaper proposition. So the final thing that you need to be kind of concerned about with growing a business is you're only going to be as good as the team that you build around you. Investors are, it's like if you were to put money into one stock, that's a terrible investment strategy. You want a diversified portfolio. Investors are reticent usually to invest in solo entrepreneurs. They want to see a partnership because in case like one of the entrepreneurs decides that for whatever reason it's not a good fit for them anymore, their investment doesn't go up in smoke because there's other partners around that can pick up the workload. But there's a reality that comes with startup life is that partnerships evolve as the business evolves. What worked in year 1 and year 2 perhaps doesn't work in year 3 and year 4 anymore. And you've probably seen plenty of business cases out there where partnerships dissolve, or one founder leaves for another firm, whatever have you. But it's an honest truth in this space. Partnerships change as the business changes. You've got to know your culture and your mission as well, especially when you're hiring up your early employees. The reason why is most early stage companies are not going to be able to compete on salary and benefits. You're not going to be able to compete with the larger firms out there. So you got to make it compelling for people to join your company. And that's understanding your culture and understanding your mission. At Mason Dixie Foods, the mission was, and still is, making real food for real people with real ingredients. The idea is food accessibility is super important, and as many people as possible should have the opportunity to have real food. Our culture was such that we focus on entrepreneurship even in-house. Anyone that we brought on was own their space, own their problems, own their solutions. We like to have any employee that came on board, any team member that joined Mason Dixie Foods, treat the company as if it's their own. So our culture was entrepreneurship. If you're building up your own business, you've got to figure out very early on what's important to you, and then how do you impart that on your early employees and your early team members. Now, with work being hybrid and remote, it's become a challenge for some companies to impart those the culture and their mission on the rest of their team. It's something that all of us are trying to figure out in real time, and will continue to do so. Hiring is definitely an art and a science. Anyone that tells you otherwise is probably not telling you the truth. It's easy to suss out hard skills from somebody. You can test them on Excel. You can test them on if they understand logistics platforms, or whatever the case may be regarding the position. What's much more challenging to suss out is if they're going to be a good fit culturally for your company. And there's no right way to figure this out. This isn't like, you have to kind of trust your gut in some capacity. I've made bad hires before because I was in desperate situations. It happens to every entrepreneur, and you got to be cognizant that when you hire someone that may not be the right fit, it impacts not only you and your performance, but it impacts everyone else around them as well. So it's important to be very, very cognizant and take your time when you're hiring your first employees. And then finally, especially with startups and emerging brands and small businesses, because they go through a really rapid growth phase, roles and responsibilities change really quickly. So it's important to have that flexibility as your companies grow. When there's only 3 or 4 people, you're going to be wearing many hats. You're going to be taking on a lot of responsibilities. And as you hire number 5, number 6, number 7, you're going to start developing departments and silos, which becomes its own problem with ensuring communication across departments. But for the first several years, you have to understand that roles and responsibilities will shift very, very rapidly. Cool. So that's like at a very high level, kind of what I wanted to talk about, the ideation stage, identifying the problem, figuring out how you're going to finance it, figure out how you get it to customers, figure out how you're going to build out your team. And yeah, so usually people ask me like what where I get my resources and what kind of where I find my information. And generally there's, to be honest, there's nothing better than how I built this podcast. If you listen to that, it's a great opportunity to actually find great entrepreneurs in a variety of different spaces, product and not product, tech, real estate, and kind of the struggles that they went through building their businesses. You often hear a lot of entrepreneurs that this is not the business that they're talking about isn't their first or the second. It might be their third or fourth rodeo. I also subscribe to a bunch of newsletters for VCs and banks and other financial institutions that play in the space that I operate in. There's a shout out, I'm going to shout out Start Out. So any LGBTQ plus entrepreneurs out there, this is a great organization with virtual and in-person events so you can meet other people, other entrepreneurs, other investors who have had similar experiences. I highly recommend Start Out to any kind of queer entrepreneurs out there. Alumni events, don't dismiss them. This is where you're going to meet that network that's going to be important for you if you choose to start a business. Startup weeks, pitch competitions, anything like this. This is usually your first foray into developing a network that will be super impactful further down the road. So cool, awesome. Without further ado, questions. And sorry I didn't bring food, it's frozen, so it wouldn't have really been helpful anyway. Yeah.
I'm curious to learn more about, in the story you were mentioning, why does this problem exist, or does this solution does not exist already? And in that same chart you had scoping out the competition much later, but would you say that when you're looking at why does this solution not already exist, it is just as important to look at competition and what other people are doing to solve that problem?
Absolutely. So I can tell you why there was no one that was doing what we're doing when we launched. Now we do have competition. It took a few years for other people to do it. So we're making biscuits with real ingredients, butter and buttermilk, no preservatives. It's actually in the food space, the fewer ingredients you have, the harder it is to make that product. And there was the reason why people weren't making it. Butter was expensive, so the biscuits themselves were expensive. And because there weren't preservatives, it was challenging to go through the frozen distribution channel because it couldn't handle freeze-thaw cycles. A lot of frozen biscuits have preservatives in them, so they can handle thawing and freezing, and they can handle a little what's called temperature abuse. And temperature abuse happens in frozen food generally, which means when it's on a truck, sometimes that truck isn't actually kept frozen. It actually goes above freezing. The only space that doesn't happen is ice cream, because ice cream can't handle a freeze-thaw cycle. So when we were scoping out the space, the reason why there wasn't competition, why we were the only ones in the, we had the first mover advantage actually, is because it was really, really challenging to do. And when we were going through finding partners that can make it, we realized a lot of the biscuit makers out there actually don't use real fats. They don't use butter. Their production lines aren't set up for that. So we had to work with partners, and it took several years of R&D to figure out a way to actually get it to a point where we could actually produce in the volumes that we needed. So to answer your question, yeah, there wasn't competition because it was very challenging to make the product, which we kind of learned as we dove deeper into it. Yeah. Yeah. So yes, on the biscuit side, and we have a line of ready-to-eat breakfast sandwiches as well. They launched last year, and we have some innovations that are launching actually next quarter as well. So our competitive advantage was we were first to market. My business partner, she has an incredible knack for understanding the consumer zeitgeist out there. She can really read the winds better than a lot of other people. So she was able to help to make Mason Dixie Foods go first to market and really build out the brand and develop the relationships with our grocery store buyers before anyone else could take that space. Plus, because we were first to market, we had higher volumes than a lot of our competition. So we had better leverage with vendors, which means our price on shelf relative to our competition was actually less too. So there was a lot of advantages that came from being first to market. However, the downside was, we had to deploy capital for consumer education. We had to explain why, we are more expensive than the competition. We had to explain why we're more expensive than Pillsbury. We'll never compete with Pillsbury on price. It's just they have different ingredients, and the Pillsbury is one product, and Mason Dixie Foods is a different product. So, does that answer your question? I was kind of like, but yeah, first to market basically. First to market, gave us the volumes, helped us like at least mitigate the pricing. Yeah.
Ross, we have a question from online. Thank you so much for sharing your story and advice. When I think about starting my own business, I always worry about large competitors that could add a new product very similar to mine in their lineup.
Yeah.
For example, were you ever worried that Pillsbury might just add a new product line of biscuits that is branded as supports regenerative farming and all natural, etc.? How do you find the confidence to launch a brand or product even with this possibility?
Okay, well, two things. One, the benefit to the space that we were working in, we were so small for quite a while that Pillsbury would never pay attention to us. So we had time to kind of figure things out. Are we concerned with like the big players launching a product similar to ours or almost exactly like ours with some different branding or some? Absolutely. The benefit to a small business is you're flexible and agile, so you can innovate faster than the large companies that are out there. So the way we stay relevant and continue to stay relevant is by launching innovations year after year, keeping our consumers engaged, keeping our buyers engaged. That's why we launched the ready-to-eat breakfast sandwiches. There's a litany of innovations being launched, like I said, next quarter. You can't rest on your laurels because the bigger companies, once they see the opportunity, they will make something very similar to yours. It's just a fact of life, especially in the food space. So your benefit as a small brand, as an emerging business, is to innovate and bring something new to market year after year after year to stay ahead of your competition. Cool. Yeah.
Being in the CPG space, there's always, with food, there's always so many regulations for like branding, for ingredients, what you can put on a label, what you cannot put on a label. So going through that journey, what were some lessons that you learned that you could share with us?
Sure. First and foremost, like what you put on the ingredient panel is super, super important. Fortunately, in the food space, there's a lot of consultants out there that can provide like those regulatory inputs. One of the challenges you'll find is regulations now differ from state to state. Like it's almost impossible for a small food business to know all the regulatory environments in which they're playing in. So you really have to find outside resources. And fortunately, there are a lot of firms out there that provide those services on behalf of small businesses. So what kind of call-outs on your packaging are approved for in the regulatory environment. What you can call out on your ingredient panel. What you are allowed to put in and call it natural or call it organic or call it regenerative. There's federal and state definitions as well regarding these terms. So fortunately, like I said, there's firms out there that can provide that input because for most entrepreneurs, it's really taxing to go through that, especially with the differences being super impactful state by state. Yeah, sure.
You mentioned innovation and vendors. How do you guys approach it?
So Mason Dixie Foods, the way we approach innovation is like one, let's go back to the mission. The mission is real food with real ingredients for real people. So we like to look at making a product that is already popular in the space. Maybe it's waffles, maybe it's scones, maybe it's pizza, maybe it's whatever, and figure out how do we, if it's a product with a lot of traction, how do we make it better? How do we make it with real ingredients? A lot of the products that you're going to see out there have additives and preservatives. So we look at the opportunity and find out what are people buying and how can we do it better? That goes back to buying those data sets. There's a lot of industries out there where you can go ahead and buy packets of data so you can see where what categories are growing, what opportunities are out there. And that's generally how most, if not all, food businesses approach innovation, is they look at where the trends are, what areas are growing, and then how can they take their own spin on it. So, yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you for your time. Like I said, don't have food with me, but I do have coupons. So great. Thank you, guys.